afternoon, my honorable friends, ladies and gentlemen. I see many friends around this table of discussion. And a lot of thanks to you, John, for arranging this very timely briefing and discussion. And indeed, it is always a pleasure to be speaking to our friends in Wales. My last official trip, actually, out of London before COVID hits. All of us was to Cardiff. I see somebody laughing. And I was so honored, really, to be among the few diplomats invited to the St. David Parliamentary Prayer Breakfast for Wales in March, just before COVID locked all of us down. And I see, of course, Darren Miller, our very good friend. And it is really an opportunity to thank him again for his big heart and giant contribution to the cause of peace in the Holy Land. Darren, I miss you and thank you. And I was truly honored also to be the first Palestinian ambassador received by the Welsh government upon my arrival to the UK. In Wales, Palestine has a solid and loving friend, and I assure you it's mutual. So today is a very important opportunity for us to actually link up and brief one another. And of course, we meet virtually because of COVID, so I understand we need to start by discussing the situation back home. And in the occupied territories, it has been by and large under some control, maybe human control and divine control. It's the Holy Land in the end. But the Palestinian government has been very careful to impose restrictions very early on. I mean, we were among the first nations, at least in the region, to impose severe restrictions, if you may. National lockdown started just when I was with Darren in Cardiff on the 5th, right. On the 4th and the 5th of March. A state of national emergency was declared and a national curfew was imposed. Simply because we know that we have to be head on and early on to deal with such a pandemic, and that has been effective in curbing the first wave, if you may. And this is not to say we couldn't have done it better. I mean, there has been and have been mistakes and losses like everywhere else. We have learned as we went along, as everywhere else, and we also had to deal with an occupying power, that is Israel, that could have cooperated much better. And unfortunately, always the political dynamics kicks in. And between March and June, the situation was by and large under control. But then since then, the main source of infection was laborers commuting between Israel and Palestine. You know, there are tens of thousands of Palestinian workers commuting between occupied territories, West Bank, Jerusalem, and Israel, and this has been a serious sort of soft spot that has led to some surge in infections and in deaths. In all, the West Bank has to date seen nearly 65,000 cases, including some 13,000 in East Jerusalem, and there have been over 600 deaths. Gaza, where I was born, is in a potentially much more acute situation, and that has everything to do with a draconian blockade since 2007, at least, as you all know, imposed by Israel on this very narrow, overcrowded and poor strip of land. Since only a trickle of people are allowed in and out of Gaza, and you know, this is definitely a fertile ground for catastrophe. There's only 40 ICU beds for 2 million people that are locked for all these years. But Gaza has so far not been, thank goodness, not been the disaster, the catastrophe it so easily could become. Another sign of the Holy Land. Still, we have seen nearly 11,500 confirmed cases and nearly 50 deaths in Gaza. The Gaza health sector is really in severe need for assistance and support and help, which is deeply understocked in every single meaning of the word, lacking about 50% of essential drugs and medicines. The health sector infrastructure is undermined in Gaza. It is definitely, there is an acute lack of facilities, staff, bed space is at premium, and it will not take much for the sector to become completely overwhelmed should this grow much further. We thank our international partners, including the United Kingdom government, for helping us combating the COVID-19 in the West Bank and Gaza. And there is an operation room as we speak now to really follow this matter closely. The UN coordinator only yesterday said that Gaza remains to be the most immediate and pressing concern. Its crumbling infrastructure, poor living conditions, and fragile healthcare system made it all equipped to face a major spike in cases. He's right there. Our eyes there, our hearts there, and our international friends with us. And hopefully we would avert a catastrophe there. Our work, both in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, is literally a matter of life and death now. Everybody is aware of it. And given the political dynamics, given the lack of the freedom of movement, given the many restrictions, it does really translate into a literal matter of life and death. Now to move on to the political side, we are really grateful for our good relations with Wales, and there is little hesitation here by you to follow the political situation. I know the many friends we have and how closely you follow it, and to condemn any violations of international law, and to support the idea of a rules-based international system, to support the cause of peace in the form of a just and equitable two-state solution in 1967 borders. We know too the strong position of the Welsh bishops in the last few months, the churches, the charities, the trade unions, civil society organizations, just this September condemning the Israeli plans for annexation for large swaths of the occupied West Bank. And let me note here, however, that the Israeli annexation of occupied territory is ongoing, even if not formalized. And this is the biggest challenge we are facing as we speak. Only this week we had news of settlement expansion in and around East Jerusalem. Only last night the Foreign Office informed me of their statement to strongly condemn this and to urge the State of Israel to halt all of its settlement activities, which is obviously designed to not only undermine, to devoid the two-state solution of any possibility. We have seen unprecedented levels of house demolitions of entire villages in the Jordan Valley over the last few weeks and months. And this year, the settlement building has reached new levels, historic new levels. And all of this is a form of annexation. In the end, there is such a fine line between settlement building and annexation. It's very blurry, and people are more clear about annexation, but less so about settlements. In the end, settlements are the beginning of actual creeping de facto annexation, and it's a matter of time. Then it becomes when, not if. And every settlement that is built is a facto claim to ownership of the land, and it is wreaking havoc by confiscating the land from its righteous owners, building infrastructure and roads, building roadblocks and checkpoints. It becomes a system of segregation itself. And every Palestinian house or village demolished is a de facto expulsion from the land. So we may have avoided the threat of formal annexation for the time being, but we haven't escaped the actual annexation, the bit by bit, the creeping annexation. And so long as the occupying force faces no consequences for building settlements, nothing will stop this, unfortunately. And this needs to be repeated and amplified at all times, because time is running out. And of course, it's not all bad news. I mean, it is not a secret that we were relieved to see the back of the Trump administration. I'm not making any revelation here. And the departing administration has overseen some of the worst, most regressive policies in the history of our conflict. And we had really absolutely no choice but to end relations with them. I was the ambassador in Washington during all that period, the beginning of the Trump administration. I was in the crossfire, if you may. And I know exactly how that administration has not only sided with Israel, because historically all U.S. administrations side with Israel, but that administration has sided with Israel's expansion, with Israel's settlements, with the settlement movement, with a biblical sort of interpretation of a political and legal conflict. And by the way, their biblical interpretation might be disputed by some of the bishops of Wales and elsewhere. But that period, which is still ongoing, has been really unfortunate to everybody who wants to see peace in the Holy Land, peace in Palestine. And the Trump administration, as you all know, moved its embassy, closed our embassy in Washington. And I always say now, wherever I go, I enjoy the UK so much that I have one person to thank for being here. That is Trump himself for picking me out. But nonetheless, all that happened, the list goes on. I mean, he has ticked Netanyahu's wish list one after another, all the way to yesterday when the Secretary of State, Pompeo, visited an illegal settlement in Ramallah, which is unprecedented in terms of its damage and challenge to international legality, international legitimacy, international order, our ability to devise rules and abide by them. This administration has no limits. It's as simple as that. And it is no surprise that Israel grabbed the opportunity, ramped up its settlement building, acted with even more impunity in the occupied territories in the last 4 years than the usual, including the direct violence against the occupied population. And the numbers are really shocking in every sense: the confiscation of land, the imprisonment, the destruction of property, and expansion of military areas. Now, the so-called peace plan was a joke, a cruel joke, really, a cruel joke. Trump did not just side with Israel. He sided with Israeli colonial expansion and with an undefined Israel. And here comes your question first, John, about the normalization. The normalization was really, with some Arab countries, was in a way to hide our heads under the sand and redraw the conflict as if the conflict is between Emirates and Israel. I mean, there was no confrontation ever there, and as if the key to peace is economic integration, regardless of people's aspirations for freedom, self-determination. And as if what was missing is that peace, and then the Middle East would have witnessed a new dawn, if you may. Of course, everybody knows that that was another way of simply denying the facts and delaying the inevitable. And regrettably, it has been such a setback in the hopes for a better future. Normalization with the Arab world and the Islamic world was a major incentive for Israel, major incentive. That's why we, the Palestinian people and leadership, have wanted to work with the Arab world and the Islamic world and wanted to offer Israel that big carrot, if you may, should it relinquish its control and occupation of the occupied territories, should a final status agreement be reached. Then Israel has such an incentive to do so. Now Netanyahu is arguing with his own public, arguing everywhere that, you see, I can have the cake and eat it too. I can simply have occupation and colonization and grave violations of human rights, and yet normalize with the Arab world. We know the key factor in this whole process is Trump and his team. We know particularly Kushner and Friedman, their ambassador in Israel, played a key role in pushing in this direction, because the plan is not to find a deal that is against the Palestinians. The plan is simply to make the Palestinians vanish. You know, the abracadabra, as if, oops, we have just vanished, and now the peace is going to happen between Bahrain, with all due respect, and with the state of Israel. In the end, we are on the ground, my friends. There are 13 million Palestinians, 6.5 million of them is in the occupied territories, and Israel itself, and the other half, 6.5, is in the diaspora. Refugees scattered all around Palestine, in Jordan, in Syria, in Lebanon, and what have you. And we are going nowhere. So what a cruel joke, and what a way of actually, making an illusion. You know, the magicians usually make you see the rabbit, and then the rabbit disappears, and then the rabbit comes back. I mean, it's a showman business that is, and I have witnessed it myself personally with the Trump team all these years. Looking ahead now, and by the way, just before I move on here, let me just say that I don't want to leave you with the impression that we are overly excited and we think Biden is going to be the savior, and the Biden presidency is going to heal all those wounds. Those wounds cannot be healed by one person or one country. It needs all of us. And in fact, as happy as we are to see the end of the Trump era, we are under no illusion that another American president could resolve all the damage that has been inflicted. It is our belief that we cannot just return to the status quo ante, i.e. just before Trump, because that, after all, is what led us to where we are now. So we need to move forward in a much more clear direction. And from my perspective, this can only happen under certain conditions. The first and the foremost is to abide by the international framework. If we lose that international legality and framework, which is the two-state solution, very well defined, all the way to 2016, December, at the very last days of the Obama administration, when the UN Security Council issued a resolution defining the occupied territories, the borders of the occupied territories, East Jerusalem being an occupied city, the illegality of the settlements, and not only that, but establishing international mechanisms for consequences against the settlements and the illegal actions. That is the framework. Second, we need international mechanism to mediate this conflict. The US has acted as a sole mediator for too long, and it is simply, it doesn't work, and it will not work. I've lived in the US long enough to know that Israel and Palestine in the US is not a foreign policy issue. It's a domestic issue. And maybe the US wants to resolve the conflict, and I believe they do want to resolve the conflict, but they can't. So US mediation, whether alone or with other international actors as junior partners, simply does not work. That is not to say that the US does not have a role to play. Of course it does, but that role must be equal to those of international players. And I believe the United Kingdom has a historic and key role to play here, absolutely. For historic reasons, the Balfour Declarations, the British Mandate of Palestine, the moral responsibility, the legal responsibility, but for current reasons, the UK is uniquely positioned, being the biggest and the strongest and the closest ally of the US, having good relations with Israel, with us, the Palestinian people, and leadership with the Arab world. The UK could be a key player in moving forward. So we do not want to exclude the US, but we have to end the US exclusion of others, like the United Kingdom, like the European forces, like other key countries. And we also need to make sure that there are always consequences for any illegality. Carrots on itself, peace processes in itself, talking in itself, will not really leverage a situation and level the field whereby we achieve the desired outcome. The last word, my personal sense of excitement is not the results of the elections and the man in the White House, that is President-elect Biden. My excitement is about the base in the US. And because I know many of these organizations, groups, movements, I'm truly, truly excited and reassured, because what happened in the last few weeks was a real comeback of the progressive forces in the United States of America, the real progressive forces in the Democratic Party, and I follow on a daily basis this inspiring phenomena of youngsters pushing for America to re-embrace the real democratic values, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution of America, all men and women are equal, the ethos that has established the US. And I'm also excited to see the movement beneath all that, the Black Lives Matter, and the connection with the international cases. Also, the Palestinian community has made a big entry into the political life in America. We have several Palestinian Americans who were elected to office over the last few days in many areas, and it was the third and the fourth generation. We're excited about the changes in the Jewish community in the US. Do you know that more than 70% of the Jewish community voted for Biden? So this whole Netanyahu trying to pay gifts, election favors to Trump did not work. In the end, the Jewish community was voting based on how they want to see a liberal, progressive America rather than a regressive right-wing Israel. So this is the source of, and I'm not going to go on the list of changes at the grassroots in the US, but also elsewhere. This really does, John, give us a serious hope for the future. And like America, the UK here, Palestine has been a cause for the progressive forces in this country, for the labor movement, for the trade unions, for the civil society, and for the churches. And I see it everywhere I go, in the universities. I mean, the base everywhere is ready for that cause of peace, that call of peace, that advancement towards what we all want. And there is a a significant cross-party consensus in the United Kingdom, cross-party, that the Palestinian issue must be settled in accordance with international law. And we must acknowledge the current UK government, the Prime Minister Johnson's government, and their position over the last few years, particularly given how aggressive the Trump administration was. They have kept their principled position. They did not adopt the so-called ultimate deal by Trump. They kept on the contours of international law, that is the UK government, and that is absolutely commendable. And we know how important that is for the UK to draw that gap and that wedge, but to stay the course given the heat of the moment. So attitudes everywhere is really giving us a bit of hope. We have a long way to go in the UK, and we need your help, particularly in the issue of recognition of the State of Palestine, following the historic decision by the Westminster Parliament in 2014 to recognize the State of Palestine. We are in touch with the government here. What we hear, some of it hints that this is on the table. And it's been discussed, but you know there is a lot of hesitation, and I'm happy to discuss it in the Q&A. And to have a final word, we really do at this point in time need action, and we need some real developments. Palestinians are politically savvy and deeply despondent, and this is the deal. There is a window of opportunity here, but it needs to be seized quickly, because people are they are losing patience in Palestine, because they have been promised many times illusion after an illusion, and a promise after an empty promise after an empty promise. So hopefully action will be the key word that would shape our way ahead and will enable us to get where we want to be. Thank you.
Okay, well, Dr. Zomlot, thank you so much to cover so much in such a short period of time, and to bring us up to date has been really interesting and really informative. You know, we'd all understand that this is such a long-running problem for the whole world, as well as obviously much more so for those in the occupied territories. And you know, I think we'd all accept that action is needed, and the sooner the better. Let me just bring in members with questions. And I saw Jenny first, then Darren, then Alan.
I suggest Alan goes first, because he's got to go to.
Oh yeah, okay. Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry about this. I've got a committee to rush off to, so it's difficult timing at the moment. I think we were all pretty glad to see the back of Trump, and that's one thing which will unify most countries in the world, and the return of predictable US policy. And whilst, you know, I share your view that, you know, a new president doesn't wipe the slate completely clean, and that, you know, there are changes that have happened in the last 4 years, which mean that we're not going back to where we were. I certainly do recognize all of that. But it does open a door that was closed previously. And the one thing which I've seen from Biden's appointments over the last week or so is that he wants to build an administration that is full of experience and knowledge, and a US administration that is engaged in the world again, which is something which I think all of us want to see. So how would you see the Palestinian engagement with that process now? What are the conditions that you believe need to be met for realistic conversations to take place with the Israeli government, and to enable the framework that you discussed to actually lead to negotiations which are more meaningful than I think we've seen for many years? And what do you, sorry, I'm allowed to find out, what do you think the Palestinians need to do? What is the Palestinian agenda to meet that challenge?
Thank you, Alan. That's the $1 million question at this very point in time. When $1 million is not much these days, but Alan, it's a thinking process, and yes, I agree with you. that this is an opportunity. A door is open, and we must seize. And in every sense, it might be the last, given what is happening on the ground, as I have described in my introductory remark. So we better seize it, all of us, and we better be serious. And I assure you, from what I know, we are absolutely serious about this. Only hours after the initial results of the elections, my President Abbas, immediately officially congratulated President-elect Biden. And you know, we had cut all relations, so it wasn't easy from our side. We are not just the UK. Congratulating him and saying this is a historic opportunity, and here is our hands. We are ready to engage immediately, and we are ready to resume relations. Only yesterday, the Palestinian government has decided to resume coordination, security coordination with Israel, and to resume all civic relations with Israel and political, which was also for Biden, because unlike Netanyahu, who is literally planting landmines on the way of Biden as we speak now. You know, the Pompeo visit right now to Israel, the settlements, all that, and trying to undermine, preempt Biden before he starts. We are really paving the way for him. So we don't want him to start with a very wobbly status quo, with a dangerous situation. So we are already doing our bit before talking to Biden, before even connecting to Biden, because we realize what you said. Having said that, I really think that you know, a status quo minus or a status quo ante will not propel us where we want to go. And I mean, 29 years is long enough in the history of a nation to learn the lesson, really longer. And I don't think even that that the Biden administration will be able to bring us back to status quo ante, i.e. the Obama time, where Biden served as the vice president. I think it will be a status quo minus, because they already declared that they cannot do anything about some of the moves that Trump did irreversibly, like the move to the embassy to Jerusalem, the recognition of Jerusalem, the issue of settlements, because Obama was labeling settlement products as illegal. Now they cannot do that, etc., etc. Also, I don't think it will be so easy for them to just restore everything as it was. You know, they inherit a very damaged sort of. Having said that, this is an opportunity for the following. Number one, to de-link the Palestinian relationship with America from the peace process. When I arrived to Washington, I discovered that we didn't exist as a bilateral partner. We only existed as part of a peace process that was not existing in the first place. So, in effect, I was kicked out of Washington because the Trump administration testified that we stopped negotiating with Israel, which is not true, by the way. So once you stop negotiating with a third party, then your diplomatic relationship with a second party is seized. That's not good. So we have to de-link the peace process from the bilateral relationship, and we have to make sure that we build a new, from the basis, a new bilateral relationship based on the mutual interests and values of Palestine and the US. Yes, we are a junior partner in this, but we are a partner. We are a partner in the war on terror. We are a partner on the stability in the region. And we believe that we are ought to establish that equitable relationship, not based on the Congress resolutions against the PLO. You know, we are still listed since 1987 as a terrorist organization. And despite all the peace agreements, and so we are ought to, when I arrived to the US, it was written on my passport, he's allowed to enter the US despite the fact that this person is a terrorist. I mean, I was the ambassador. Of course, they dealt with me with such respect, and I never had issues, and I was the most ambassador visiting the White House. But they had to deal with all these Congress laws that was not based on the US diplomatic interest or the US strategy or policy or interest. It was based on some senators here and there. And you know the game, I don't have to say it, but you know the game of elections and money and bully and lobby. And these legislations, these laws have crippled the US administration's ability to actually convene and conduct a healthy diplomatic relation. I would argue establishing from the scratch, point zero, a healthy bilateral relationship is the key entry to the peace process that America can play around, not the other way around. Lastly, I think this is an opportunity, of course, to open up with Biden early on and see what they can do. But I think the more opportunity is to work bottom up in the US. And I think we have such an alliance in the Middle East. because people realize who's the victim and who's the aggressor, and people realize more than what we think, and more what the mainstream media think, because of the social media and the young generation. So I think in the US we need to build that bottom-up strategy. We need to link with all these alliances, growing members of the church community, of the black community, of the Jewish community, of the Hispanic community, wherever you go, are ready for that real alliance, that real movement. And in the US, I've learned one lesson. It's not about how righteous your cause is or how moral it is. It's how much muscles you have in the US. And I think if we focus with the people at this point in time, a mighty, huge muscle is going to be built.
Thank you very much for that. John, I've just had a message from Darren. His laptop has run out of charge and he's trying to find his charger.
Okay.
So he wants
it's coming back on now.
to rejoin.
I've managed to make it in, but it's just voice on my phone, my mobile device.
I need to leave now. Ambassador, thank you very much for your time. I'm very grateful to you. It would be good to talk football at some point.
Oh, yes.
Okay, but thank you for your time today.
No, we will come, Darren and I, and go to see a match one day.
Yeah. Take care.
Okay, thanks, Alan. Well, Jenny, are you okay with Darren to come in now? Are you all right for time?
Well, I've got a committee, so I've got to leave in about 10 minutes. But if Darren wants...
Darren, are you reasonably okay for time?
Yes, I am. I'm okay for time. I just wanted to say thank you so much, Dr. Zomlot, for giving us some time today. It's great to have you connecting with us once again in Wales. We really do appreciate the relationship, the warm relationship that we have with you and the people of Palestine. And, you know, I, for one, want to continue to help foster those in any way that I can, and I know that other members of the Senedd feel very strongly the same way. Can I also offer you my deepest sympathy on the death of Saeb Ekerat? I know what an important figure he was in recent Palestinian politics and history, and I'm sure his loss has been felt very sorely by you and other senior diplomats and political leaders in Palestine. And thirdly, really, I was wanting to explore with you what the relationships are like now between Palestine and the other Arab nations. Obviously, there have been these peace agreements or prosperity agreements that have been done with Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, and that's quite a significant shift in policy from those countries. Does the fact now that there are divided voices in the Arab world, does that help or hinder prospects for peace, in your opinion, for Israel and Palestine?
Thank you, Darren, for this, and thank you for your condolences about Dr. Ekerat. You're absolutely right. Indeed, we have lost a giant, a titan of our diplomacy and voice. May he rest in peace. I shall convey your condolences to his family and our leadership. I know he was a friend of yours, and a friend of ours and mine. The Arab nations. See, this has to do with Trump primarily. That was the key push factor, if you may. The base of Trump sees Israel as a touchstone. The foreign policy of Trump was to withdraw completely from the region, and you have seen the news only 2 days ago. He's pulling out of Iraq and of Afghanistan, and his international allies, including the UK, is very uncomfortable without even coordinating it with them. He's pulling, by and large, out of the Middle East. You know, America first and all that. And if you see and hear Biden, he's saying America back. So his foreign policy was actually to give Netanyahu the keys of the White House. Israel has become the main sort of subcontractor of the US in the region. And that explains to you the normalization, because some of these rulers, and I dare to say that this is not the Emirati people or the Bahraini people or the Arab people. This is key certain rulers saw in that as a key insurance policy against Trump and against a possible Biden. And I don't want to. I know, John, this is off the record, right? It's not recorded, the conversation. Maybe I'll take your permission to tweet about the briefing, but no recording. So I can be free of saying, they know that they need a watchdog in Washington, if you may. And Netanyahu was telling them he could give them immunity against a possible Biden administration. And immunity from what? I don't need to list the many things. So their move was really primarily a very narrow calculation of their own interest. And in the process, they have really undermined severely their brothers and sisters in Palestine. Severely, I tell you. Nothing has hurt us more than this. It's a knife in our back at the very worst time possible. And Israel is using these countries, and I shouldn't say countries, I shouldn't say nations or people, these regimes, these rulers, to actually do something that is even more damaging than normalization. Settler movement leaders visited Dubai only a few days ago, and part of the agreement between the trade agreement did not exclude, when the UK excludes settlements in the occupied territories, when the US still excludes settlements in the occupied. The US under Trump, the Emirati deal did not exclude these settlement products, and the Bahraini foreign minister visited Jerusalem yesterday, just hours after Israel announced the building of another 1,200,000 units around Jerusalem. Just tells you how much this will be used by Netanyahu to tell you in the UK and in Europe and the rest of the world, if the Arabs do this, why are you, don't be more Pope than the Catholic, or Catholic than the Pope. Don't be more royal than the king or the queen. So it's damaging. It's damaging. It's painful. It's very painful. Yet I don't believe this is sustainable, Darren. It's not sustainable, and things on the ground will take the matter either to a different direction in the positive sense or a negative sense. But in both cases, this will be washed away, because none of the dynamics of the conflict changed. The conflict remains to be Palestinian-Israeli. The people are still there. None of the real depth of emotions and feelings and support and solidarity of the Arab world to their brothers and sisters in Palestine has changed. None of the actual components of the dynamics in the region has changed. To the contrary, it has gotten worse. So while some of the rulers have played, election favors, I think their bet has failed. And remember, they didn't get their man in the White House for a second term. So Biden will start with one main thing, that these guys tried to be so publicly against him. And hopefully that will bring about a more sane U.S. policy that will look at the U.S. interest, will look at the stability of the region, because it's a vital reason. We'll come back to the region, and then that Palestine will come up again, because you cannot do the region without resolving this core issue.
Could I just pose a follow-up question, John?
Well, can I make a question, Darren?
Jenny, you can come back. Yeah, go on, Jenny. Yeah.
All right. I just wanted to slightly focus a little bit more on the situation in Gaza at the moment, because I wrote down that there'd been 11,500 COVID infections and 50 deaths. In a population of 2 million, that is extraordinary, if I've got my figures right, if I've heard you right. And if so, because that compares unbelievably well with the situation we've had in Wales, and have you thought of writing up how you managed to achieve that? Secondly, there's a lot of speculation in Britain about the possible cut in the foreign aid budget by the UK government. And were that to be the case, what impact might that have on Gaza and the West Bank? And thirdly, all related, is that I'm aware from another aid agency I'm in touch with that in December it's going to be possible to, if you make a donation to an organisation, the government is going to top up that money by the same amount. Now, this is obviously not been publicised yet for obvious reasons, but that's what I've been told by an organisation that I plan to give some money to. So if that's the case, how are you, on behalf of the Palestinians, going to ensure that organisations that are supporting the populations of Gaza and the West Bank are benefiting from that offer?
First, Jenny, thank you for being here. I miss you, and thank you for arranging the briefing, but that was physical, that was human, I miss these days. And you know, at the beginning of COVID, I used to say, oh, it's okay, we now do the Zoom and the team and all that, but it's not okay, and I think we have underestimated the effect of this virus on our human interaction and overestimated virtual nonsense. Anyway, hopefully we will see each other in person. And as the Queen said, we will meet again soon. Jenny, if you mean that the numbers are low in Gaza, if I understood well, the numbers are low in Gaza for a few reasons, but the first and the foremost, the 90%, is that Gaza has been under lockdowns for 14 years. Under real lockdown, Gaza has not been able to move anywhere in any direction. And that lockdown, it was not meant to protect Gaza from COVID 14 years ago. It was meant to dismantle the fabrics of Gaza and to bring people to their knees, by Israel, of course. But that has helped, I must say. There are byproducts of insanity. And this was one of the byproducts. Israel is one of the most hit in the region and maybe worldwide because it has the opposite. It's a hub. They are moving between New York and London, and as you know, and that has been the main source even to the West Bank. So that's the first reason in Gaza. The second reason is that there was very serious our government intervention, and one of the most popular visits to Gaza was from the health minister from Ramallah, who visited a wonderful lady, a doctor, who really made sure that the same procedures in Ramallah are in Gaza, and there was some cooperation with the de facto government of Hamas in that, because it was a national catastrophe, a national pandemic, a national crisis. That helped. And thirdly is the international community, particularly the role of UNRWA was really key. Remember, UNRWA serves around 80% of the population in Gaza. I mean, it's most of them are refugees. So UNRWA, the international assistance was absolutely key. But we shouldn't push our luck, and we should keep our fingers crossed, because these numbers could change. And the situation could hit southward, and we have to keep absolutely. There is a fifth and most maybe very important factor. You know, the vast majority of the population in Gaza are young. The vast majority. I mean, are young. You're talking about unbelievable numbers. Like only less than 3% of the population more than 65%. Less than 3% more than 65 years old. The remaining, the majority are children and young people. And COVID targets the older generation. Now, having said that, I haven't received any information from the UK government that they will cut their aid. The only thing that happened over the last few weeks that they thankfully added another $20 million to their contribution to UNRWA, which I publicly, by statement, welcomed, because it came. We requested that. UNRWA for us is a very key international organization that serves one of the most crucially needed segments. The UK did not tell us it will change its funding. Of course, we understand the economic dilemma not only in London but in Berlin and Paris and everywhere. And we understand that COVID will cost dearly the business of all the affairs of international aid. But we are hoping that will not really affect much the UK side of the story, because in the end the UK contribution to us is not really huge in comparison to our budget. I mean, the main contribution comes from the European Union, I must say. But the UK contribution to UNRWA, the UK contribution to the health sector and to the education sector in Palestine is immense. So we need to keep it. As for the please, Jenny, if you send me any piece of information about the government decision to top up any organization that help, I haven't heard it, I must say. And I am in constant touch. Now they call me the Naga in the Foreign Office. I'm in constant touch with the ministers, with the senior staff. We are friends, really. We go in St. James's Park during the lockdown and have our drinks. But they haven't told me really, Jenny, that there is a resolution as such. But if that is the case, it would be great news. It would be great news, and we will work with you and with all our partners to make sure that we will make the UK government regret its decision by topping up everywhere.
Okay, well, obviously it's not public information, but this is what this aid agency told me to do, to keep back my donation until December, so that it could be increased. But any information I have, I'll email it across to you. I'm afraid I have got to go to a committee meeting myself as well. So lovely to see you, and keep up the great work, and see you again before too long, I hope.
Thanks, Jenny.